Hello everyone, welcome to CryptoPi. In today's video, I want to talk about Bitcoin and Fed's monetary policy, to be specific, quantitative tightening and quantitative easing. If you like the analysis and find some logical points in the video, then do hit the subscribe button and engage with the channel. Alright, good. So what we are looking here is the Bitcoin in the dollar pair, in its dollar evaluation, and the green dotted line is 200-week moving average, and at the bottom is the RSI. What I want to show today is overlapping basically this chart, which is the Fed's balance sheet, which you might have seen in a couple of other videos by other guys who are sharing the input from Fed or sharing basically how Fed's monetary policy is changing. And I'm simply going to add it over the Bitcoin chart. Now what we see here is basically when did Fed start quantitative tightening, quantitative easing, but we have to break it down. What I found out is there were a few years when quantitative easing began, and especially after the recession of 2008. Here, the first QE began in March of 2009, since Bitcoin came into picture, the market came into picture in October 2009. We don't have data, but if we zoom in over here, then we see that quantitative easing had begun and gradually Bitcoin trading had begun. The market was still not very mature. But then later on, in the next phases of quantitative easing, market had already matured good enough. It had already gained some traction. Bitcoin had already gained some traction. And what we see here, that before the 200-week moving average even comes into existence, we had already 3 quantitative easing days. If I switch on quantitative easing when it ended, you can see that the first quantitative easing lasted pretty short. So it was from March 2009 till March 2010, so just 1 year. Probably the on and off of quantitative easing was because market was still recovering from the recession of 2008, and Fed most likely was taking very careful steps to not make any mistakes and have another recession. So you can see that here it was from March 2009 till March 2010. Then November 2010, it began and it ended fairly quickly in June 2011. And then after a few years, in September 2012, quantitative easing began and it went up until October 2014. Now, there are few points which are not just about quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. There are some phases which are cool down phases. So for example here, QE ended, but this is a cool down phase, or Fed sometimes call it maintenance phase. And these phases can last pretty long. It can be months and it can be years. In this case, it was almost 16 from 2014 and it was going until March 16th, 2020, or you can just say March. Doesn't have to be specifically March 16th. And this was during the Corona crash, when Fed started quantitative easing again. And that easing was going on until 2022. And since then, we have seen quantitative tightening. If I switch on, when did quantitative tightening begin? So for the current phase, which we see in social media in the last few months, that quantitative easing has begun, QT is ended, QE is going to start. It is basically this thing which everyone is talking about. The QT of current cycle, our current phase, began already in June 2022, and we can see that Fed has been not injecting money in the system. This particular cool down phase or maintenance phase, or whatever term is popular, lasted until 2017, and then QT began. And once QT began, you can see that Fed is not printing money for supporting, or rather maybe they are not printing money to take care of inflation. But in this case, the quantitative tightening phase was most likely to stop injecting money in the banks, and I think it was to control the inflation. What I see other than this is the same QT began here, and there was no injection of money. Fed was probably only printing or having injection in the system so that banks function properly, but not enough so that people can go and start investing in riskier assets. So this was not the phase where Fed was saying that, all right, here is crazy money, go put money in your altcoins and so on. One thing to keep in mind is whenever any of this QT or QE phase, when they begin or when they end, it takes 3 months to 6 months, or it could take also almost 3 quarters, so that's 9 months, for the decision to really impact, to have any kind of impact in the risk assets. So here QT began, Bitcoin still rallied for a few months, and then the downtrend began as well. Now this downtrend might not necessarily be because of QT, because of the start of the QT. If we see our distribution line, price had crossed the distribution line, and that was the start of the downtrend or the bear market here. And here, these are the accumulation lines, and you would see that Bitcoin continued its journey downwards until the price crossed the accumulation line. There are a few things which are happening right now. The first one is quantitative tightening ended in December. Now, when this news came in, there was so much positivity in the market that we will have another rally, another alt season. Bitcoin will reach to its all-time high. But one thing which I already mentioned is, as soon as this is announced, the announcement was already done somewhere in October, that in December quantitative tightening will end. But after it has ended, it does not mean quantitative easing has begun. So right now, what Fed is doing, they are in this reserve management phase. Basically, it's a maintenance phase. They are not injecting money in the system, but they are injecting just enough to make sure that banks survive, the system is working, economy continues to function properly. Over here, where I have marked this arrow, liquidity injection, this was again not quantitative easing. Quantitative tightening had ended, and we can see that the supply is going higher, but officially there was no quantitative easing happening in this year between September 2019 and March of 2020. QE really began after March of 2020, and probably it took a couple of months before the money. I think in this case it might be different because the corona crash was so severe, probably things got speeded up. But otherwise, in the year 2025, 2026, QT has ended, but QE has not officially begun. There is no injection of liquidity in the market. You might see other charts about global M2 supply, global M1 supply, and so on. But that does not really govern the price of Bitcoin, or that does not really govern how banks would get money or would get liquidity from Fed. What I want to conclude in the end is, no matter what QE and QT ends or begins, it's good to keep in mind what exactly is Fed doing. And when we see such liquidity injection, we have to keep in mind that it could take a couple of months, or maybe 1 to 2 quarters. So QT ended here. Now we wait for another QE to officially begin, and maybe after 2 to 3 quarters after QE begins, that's when we would start seeing another rally. Now, if I align this analysis with our accumulation line and distribution line, to me it is another confluence where QT has ended, the announcement of QE is not exactly there. It's there, but it has not begun. The liquidity injection has not begun yet. We are still in the maintenance phase of Fed to see how things turn out after QT has ended. And once QE begins and then liquidity injection starts coming in, basically money moving into risk assets like Bitcoin, it would already be the time where we will be in September, October. So very close to the start of the accumulation phase of Bitcoin. So price, I don't know where the price would be. Price could be somewhere here, or it might just stay for the whole year somewhere in this range, or it can drop. Okay, probably it won't drop that much, but it could drop up until this fair value gap, which is approximately in the range of 29 to 35,000. This is still a pretty low estimate, and this would happen, I think, if there is a huge crash in the overall international markets or something goes pretty bad. But a reasonable estimate would be for Bitcoin price to go down would be up until this particular order block. So I would see 2 to 3 things. Where is the RSI? Has it been in a consolidation phase or accumulation phase? Has Bitcoin price been in accumulation phase? And how far below the 200-week moving average are we? And how far are we from the accumulation phase? If Bitcoin price, let's say, drops over here, and we are still in May or June, I would still wait a few months before deciding whether we are already in an accumulation phase, because it can happen like previous years. As soon as price crosses the accumulation phase, the price drops another 25-30%. This happened in 2018, it happened in 2022, and over here in 2015. So price did cross in 2015, January 2015, but after almost 7 months, it dropped again by 20% or something. Let's see how big of a crash, 38%. So if price is here and the price stays in this particular region, and if it drops again another 35 to 40%, it comes very close to the fair value gap. Yeah. So that would be all for this analysis. I think we just have to wait and watch what would happen with Fed's monetary policy, because that is basically what makes risk asset like Bitcoin go up or down. And we will continue to follow the strength in the market using RSI. Here we already discussed. We have seen a divergence. The price is going up, the strength is going down. So perhaps that would be also a reason to say that in midterm year, which has already begun since January, midterm year price, which surely, or not surely, but it's pretty likely to continue to go downwards until the market gains its strength again. That would be all for today's video. If you like the content, then do hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.